Hi, hottie Lamatis with the swimmer's bodies. Welcome back to Wild Geese. I'm your host, Anna. If you're new here, welcome. If you're old here, you're hot. I got a comment on the last episode where I said hottie Lamatis with the swimmer's bodies from somebody that was like, that was a jump scare because I was on the filming of that episode of Hannah Montana. What is Wild Geese good for if it's not to make you weirdly nostalgic about very niche things that happened to you in your childhood? Anyway, I'm really excited about today's topic. I've been getting a lot of questions around like the creative process. Are we surprised? But a lot of people are asking, how did you even get started in the first place? How do you know what project you want to zero in on when there's like 1,000 different interests going on? How do you finish a project? Because finishing is a skill in and of itself. So we're going to dive into all of that. But before we get into that, I actually have a really exciting resource to share with you that actually goes back a couple of episodes to the rabbit hole episode. If you remember us talking about taking on more projects, allowing yourself to get a little bit weirder with your interests, become more curious. There's actually a platform called Craftsy that is made exactly for that purpose for people like you and me. Thank you, Craftsy, for sponsoring this video. But if you're a creative person looking to tap into your curiosity, which I think all Wild Geese listeners really are, Craftsy is your online resource for all things creative. Craftsy offers over 2,000 inspiring classes for makers of all skill levels with step-by-step instruction and more than 20 categories like knitting, cooking, sewing, painting, and so many more. And in playing around with the platform, I actually found a kawaii amigurumi crochet class by Stacy Trock, which made me so excited to pick up my crochet tools again. It has been years and I put down crochet because I could never get the proportions right. But Stacy is actually really good at explaining things like how to get proportions right so that I can make a little stuffed animal and give it as a gift. I think spending your time making handmade gifts for the people you love is such a sweet, fulfilling thing to do, and Craftsy helps you do just that. So the first 1,000 of you to click the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. This is valid for new members only. So if you're ready to pick up your next project, but you don't want to do it alone, head over to the link in the description or click this QR code to get started today. I've got an ass. There is an absolutely massive fly flying around my room right now, so we have a little friend with us on today's episode. But anyway, I got a few messages back to back from people asking sort of similar questions about how to start when it comes to new projects, whether it's in the context of starting a digital garden or starting to write a blog or starting a podcast, whatever it is that you want to start soon. And in thinking about how to answer that question, I thought it would be kind of an incomplete answer to stop at how to start, because then there's how to keep going and there's how to finish. And I kind of hesitate on this episode because if you think about the process of creation too much, you can get too in your head and it can become this perfectionist spiral where you're hearing all of this advice from all of these people about like, here's how you're going to write your first novel. First, you're going to set up your space so that it's optimal for creation, completely clear from anything else. Then you're going to blah, blah, blah. And you're thinking like, if I don't do this exactly the same way as this other person that was able to be successful in it, then I won't be successful in it. And if my way of living in the world is not exactly the same as theirs, like this is how we get into thought spirals that kind of keep us stuck. So I'm going to tell you what works for me, and please take it with a grain of salt. We all have different schedules. We all have different brains. We all need different accommodations. But in thinking about this question of where to start, my first thought was big paper planning day. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you've never heard those words before, that's okay. We will get into it. I will be giving sort of a very brief overview of what big paper planning day is, the function of it, and whatever in this episode. But if you go back to episode number 8, I also have a full interview with Lexi Merritt, who's the founder of the Pretty Decent Internet Cafe. She changed my life with this process. And basically what she does is once a quarter, she has big paper planning day where people come with these like science fair trifolds, or if you're like me and you like to do things digitally, she has a whole Notion template that you work through. And basically you come together as a group and you plan your whole next quarter. And you're like ideating together about how you can experiment with the design of your own life. It's a really, really fun day. But I think that the reason why Lexi's process works is because it starts with the why. And I want to read to you the DM that got me thinking in the direction of this episode. She says, "Hey Anna, I've been seriously enjoying your podcast episodes and your blog. They've been inspiring me to move forward and finally get started started with my own writing journey and actually stick with it. So I guess that with this message, I wanted to ask, how did you get started? Like, how did you know where to get started and what to talk about? Beginnings can be so daunting sometimes. And I think that question of where to get started and what to talk about is something that I hear over and over again with my clients of like, I have so many things that I'm interested in, so many things that I might want to talk about, but where's the most impactful place to start? And I think that you can't find that where until you find the why. And there's an essay called The Anatomy of the Why by Muse Guided on Substack. I actually found her Substack this week and binged like so many of these essays. They're so good. But in this essay, The Anatomy of a Why, she gets to the heart of why the why is so important and why it's really the first step. She says, the how only matters once you have a why. What is your why? That single question is both a dagger and a divining rod. It slices through pretense and posturing, then points unshakably towards meaning. Most of us live in a blur of hows. How to be more productive, how to get rich, how to be loved, how to go viral, how to stay young, how to sleep better, meditate deeper, write smarter, run faster, be less anxious, less annoying, less ourselves. But how is logistics. It is scaffolding without a structure, syntax without a sentence. Why is origin. Why is architecture. Why is rebellion against automation. It is what separates artists from decorators, prophets from parrots. Your why is what keeps you writing even when no one reads you, what makes you stand your moral ground when it's easier to nod and comply. So if your what comes from your why, how do you find your why? And I think that's where Lexi Merritt and the Big Paper Planning Day really comes in and gave a structure to the process of finding my why and following it. And I come back to this process once every single quarter, and I've been doing that for over a year now. So I'm going to give a very quick and dirty sneak peek and like rough overview of what we do in Big Paper Planning Day. If any of this interests you, go check out Big Paper Planning Day. This is not sponsored by Lexi Merritt. I am not getting anything by pointing you in that direction. I just love everything that Lexi Merritt has done. You can get a much deeper understanding of this process if you go and do Big Paper Planning Day. But basically, you sit down and you start with making a list of the things that you want. These can be material things. These can be experiences. These can be things that you want to feel more of. You know, I want to feel more ecstasy. I want to feel more fun, whatever it is. I actually just pulled a list that I made from one of my past quarters of the list of things that I wanted as an example. So I said, I want to travel abroad with people I love. I want consistent XK months. This was a revenue goal that I am blacking out for my own privacy, but let's just hypothetically say it's 10K months. I want to release a song that I wrote. I want a loving partnership. I want to build a community of creative activists. I want to get a cat. I want to perform a show I love with the people I love. I want to make my home as cozy as possible. And I want to restart the podcast. So this was months ago before I had come back for season 2. I knew that I was on this long break, but I wanted to bring it back. I didn't know what that looked like yet, but the start of bringing it back was putting it on this list. Once you have the list of the things that you want, you then start asking yourself why you want these things. And you start doing that by saying, I want X so that I can Y. And you don't just ask yourself why once. You ask yourself why a couple of times until that very solid goal becomes abstracted. So for example, if you said, I want to travel abroad this summer, and then you started asking yourself why through this sentence of, I want to travel abroad this summer so that I can ... There are so many different reasons that might come out of that. And the first reasons that you come against might still have a very narrow path towards that want. So you could say, I want to travel abroad so that I can learn French. Okay, why do I want to learn French? And then it becomes, I want to learn French so that I can communicate with my family members. Okay, why do I want to communicate with my family members? I want to communicate with my family members so that I can feel more connected to my heritage. Okay, now you've got this goal, feel more connected to my heritage. That's something that I might be able to achieve every single day in different ways than this grander, more concrete goal of traveling abroad that may or may not be accessible to me right now. So creating abstract goals opens up a path for divergent thinking. And this abstract goal is your why. So back to my list of my wants from a couple of quarters ago. Here's how I abstracted those goals. So for travel abroad with the people I love, I said I wanted to do that so that I can experience fresh perspectives. For consistent 10K months, I said I want to do that so that I can be financially well and confident. To release a song that I wrote, I wanted to do that so that I can believe in my creations. I wanted a loving partnership so that I can cultivate intimacy in my life. Hopefully, you're picking up what I'm putting down here. And having those abstracted goals, those whys, also gives you greater insight into what your values are in the moment. And your values, like your top values, can change. And they will change throughout your life. I hope so. I hope that you're a changing person. And I think it's really worth it to keep coming back around and asking yourself, what's important to me right now? What are some values that feel really inherent to me? What are some values that feel very current to this moment? What are some values that feel a little bit out of reach for me that I'd like to experiment with cultivating more in my life? So for me, this quarter, I said I value connection, curiosity, self-respect, and simplicity. From there, pick a couple of your abstracted goals, narrow it down. And then what you're going to do is give yourself an action menu. And again, this is why doing this at actual big paper planning day is really beneficial, because you can do this with other people. You can brainstorm with other people on how you can do these things and accomplish them every single day. But your action menu is really meant to be a list of options of things that you can do every single day based on the energy level that you're at, because you are not going to wake up from one day to another the same person. You're just not going to. Sometimes I get out of bed and I have a headache right out of bed, and then that headache stays with me all day long until I go to sleep. On those days, do you think I'm going to do the same actions that I'm going to do on the days that I feel my best? Absolutely not. So I want to give myself low energy, mid energy, and high energy options for every day. And then this is key. I want to give myself credit every single time that I do one of these actions. Lexi Merritt talks about a system where you literally give yourself a gold star sticker. Because here's the thing, if you have a big project that you want to start, then you kind of have to start with building up the identity of the person that can achieve that big project. And I think a spot that a lot of us stumble, a spot that I definitely for years struggled with, was having these ideas and then getting mad at myself for not being able to accomplish those things in X amount of time. So I would give myself a deadline, and then if I didn't reach the deadline, I'd be all mad at myself. But it's like, really, did I let myself cultivate the identity of the person that could do that thing first? Did I have that scaffolding of self-trust and belief built up? No, I didn't. You have to approach the bigger things with an understanding and like a knowing in your body that you are a person that keeps your promises to yourself. And that happens really incrementally. So if we're talking about a couple quarters ago when I was thinking about restarting the podcast and I asked myself why, I said, I want to restart the podcast so that I can be a conduit to creation. Okay, how can I give myself options to be a conduit to creation every single day? So here's a very short list of different options that I gave myself. I said I could write my morning pages. I could add to my digital garden. I could write a poem. I could create a reel or a TikTok. I could reach out to one potential collaborator. I could send a message to someone who's creating something I admire, or I could write one line for my newsletter. Those were all different ways that I could live through my why of being a conduit to creation every single day before I relaunched the podcast. So I didn't have to wait until I finally relaunched the podcast to pat myself on the back. I could pat myself on the back by giving myself a gold sticker every single day that I did something on that action menu. And the action menu was in all actuality longer than that. So I had more options than that. But say it was a really low energy day, I was sick or something like that. I gave myself the option to write one line for my newsletter, and I could still give myself a gold star for doing that. But then if it was a higher energy day, I can do something that takes more out of me, something like outlining a future episode. Both of those things are me being a conduit to creation. So I am achieving that goal every single day. So sometimes the goal that you start with is the project that you want to pursue, right? So if you start with, I want to start a podcast, that's the project that you're trying to pursue. And you can use these action menus as a propeller towards that thing. But if you pick just a couple of these abstracted goals to focus on, the abstracted goal can also lead you towards a project that maybe you didn't expect. So you can narrow it down to a couple of those goals and ask yourself, okay, what's a project that I might associate with this goal? For example, if I start with, I want a community of creative activists, that's not quite a project yet, but then I abstract it until I get to the abstract goal of, I want to nurture my web of relationships. Okay, with that abstract goal in mind, I can then brainstorm some projects that I might want to work on. And I might land on a project like starting a book club. But definitely narrow down your list of goals, because you don't want to have like 12 abstract goals that you're juggling and 12 projects that you're juggling at one time. You can narrow it down to 2 goals that you're really working towards, or like 4 is probably the most that you would want to work with at one time. But for each goal that you're narrowing down to, you can have a project that you're working towards. And Lexi has a cute little analogy that she brings up of like, make sure that that the actions that you're putting in your action menu are not like a full project that's like dressed up in a trench coat to look like one action. So like, I'm not going to put start a podcast on my action menu. I'm not even going to put create a podcast episode in my action menu, because the process of creating one episode is a project in and of itself. You've got the brainstorming, you've got the researching, you've got the outlining, you've got the recording, you've got the editing, you've got the publishing. So I'm not going to put create a podcast episode as one action to be done in one day. So, okay, we've done this whole process. We've decided which projects we want to move towards. Now that we've decided, what does the creative process actually look like? Celine Nguyen has a really good essay called Oblique Strategies for Starting a New Project. She has a couple of bullet points that put it really quite simply. She says, a strategy for starting, slow preparation, fast execution. A strategy for continuing, don't be afraid of things because they're easy to do. And a strategy for finishing, once the search is in progress, something will be found. And I liked this image for starting of slow preparation and fast execution because I found that to be really, really true, especially in what I'm doing with this podcast. There are 2 weeks between these episodes because with work and life and all of these other things, I want to have the time to do that slow preparation with every episode. So we can think of slow preparation as those slow, methodical, everyday small actions that you take to get to that fast execution moment. The fast execution moment for me in this podcast is sitting down to actually record it. I say fast. It takes me like 20 minutes to record 2 minutes of this podcast sometimes because I don't know what I'm saying. But you know what I mean? I don't really give myself too much time so that I could like drag out recording for days and days on end. It's kind of like fast execution. Once it's recording time, I've got to record. Okay, hi, it's day 2 of filming. Cue the outfit change because I do not force myself to do things in one day. This is kind of hilarious to me because I had just made the point about fast execution and not letting myself record for days and days on end. And then I come back the next day being like, look at me not forcing myself to do it all at once. So just let this remind you that we contain multitudes and 2 things can be true at once. You can do fast execution and also not force yourself to finish everything in one day. Anyway, so now we are in the process of whatever project you decided to work on. From my experience, what I have learned happens in the middle of a process for whatever project you're working on is that things either start to feel really hard, they start to feel really boring, or they start to feel suspiciously easy. Again, I can't really get too specific on the process because I don't know what you're working on. You could be working on learning how to make a quilt. I don't know what the process for quilting is. But usually, no matter what the project is, there's going to be some sort of fear that pops up along the way, and you can start to pay attention to what that fear is. Celine Nguyen says, whenever I start a new project, a certain kind of empty, formless fear settles over me. The specific content of the fear depends on the medium. If I'm writing, the fear that I have nothing to say, the fear that I will not be able to find anything to say, that there will be no argument or thesis at the core of what I'm doing, that I won't be able to sustain the argument over hundreds or thousands of words in an elegant and even literary way. If I'm designing, the fear that I cannot make something beautiful or useful, the fear that I cannot make it both beautiful and useful at once, that all I can do is uselessly generate something derivative, something that can't possibly be useful to anyone. And I think this really calls back to the question that spurred the idea for this episode in the first place. That person was asking me, how do I start? But also, how do I know what to write about? And it's hard to know what to write about before you started writing. And once you've started writing, it's hard to push through those fears that you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know if you're going to be able to find, like she said, the thesis. This is a fear that I've talked about and that I have with every episode that I put out there. I go into it with a general idea of a topic that I want to talk about. And the whole time that I'm creating it, I'm like, yeah, this one's going to flop. This one's going to be the one that makes no sense. I don't know where this one is going. And those are all of those fears that start to cloud you as you are in the process of creating something. And you kind of have to face that fear and say, yeah, okay, if I make something derivative, what then? What's the worst case scenario? Will I be okay? Yes, I will be okay. And that actually reminds me of something that Lexi Merritt said in episode number 8 when she was talking about how the word essay actually means to try. All you're doing is trying. And anything that you do, and yes, I am talking about a podcast, a quote unquote video essay. So what I'm doing is I'm trying, okay? And the thing is, you can't necessarily fail if the thing that you're doing literally means to try, which that's quite nice. But I know sometimes that there are more like methodical things. Again, back to the quilting image. Yeah, that's a physical thing that you can see if you tried and failed. And it feels really like I set aside crochet because I was like, I can't get these proportions right. And it feels like I tried and I have nothing to show for it. But then I have to ask myself, does that mean that all of those hours that I spent crocheting were a waste of time? No, not at all. I spent those hours creating something physical to bring into the world, and I wasn't doom scrolling during that time, and that was a lot of time that I was not doom scrolling. That's a good thing. So that's one thing that can happen, is that it can start to feel really hard as these fears come up, but also it can start to feel really boring. You lose the novelty of it very quickly, especially if you don't feel immediately successful. And I read a Substack called Are You Boring Enough to Be Successful by Layla Shakely. She says, what if we saw boredom not as a warning sign, but as a progress indicator? When you're bored, you've moved past the shiny beginner phase. You've reached a level of competence where conscious effort decreases. You're approaching the territory where mastery can emerge. You're at the exact point where most competitors quit. Boredom, in this light, becomes not just something to endure, but something to celebrate, a signal that you're on the path where few are willing to tread. And I really liked the reframing of boredom as actually kind of a sign of success, a sign that you are continually showing up to something, that you're gaining a mastery in it. Because I think that usually we see boredom as something to escape from, as a sign of stagnancy, and I just think it's reassuring to know that that's not necessarily true. And Lexi Merritt also talks about this in her essay, Novelty, Wanes, Then What? She says, we don't make a plan at Big Paper Planning Day and then expect ourselves to stay interested in it forever. As anyone who's ever bought a slew of cross-stitching supplies only to lose interest as soon as they got home from the craft store knows, novelty wears off. Interest wanes. Curiosity, once satiated, becomes harder to maintain. My hypothesis is that we can plan for the inevitable dip in novelty. We can accommodate for our need for new, interesting curiosities and adventures. It starts, as with anything, with deciding to start. And I guess I want to take a moment to actually talk about my process, because that's what a lot of people have been asking about, and I'm trying to keep this general because I want to talk to creative people more widely than people looking to start a podcast or looking to write an essay or something, because I think that a lot of these things can be applied across the board. But I just want to be clear that when it comes to writing and preparing for these episodes, the start of the actual creative process beyond figuring out my why and my greater values is digital gardening. It is note-taking. And this is actually, I think, why Celine Nguyen says that her strategy for continuing in a project is don't be afraid of things because they're easy to do. She says, that's the thesis of Sonka Aren's How to Take Smart Notes. Every intellectual endeavor starts with a note, Aren asserts. Good writing begins with good note-taking. This approach makes writing seem easy. It's not a mystical, mysterious process. It's actually a very ordinary, straightforward one. I have this instinctual suspicion of the easy things. Shouldn't writing involve a little bit more effort, strain, suffering? And this feels true because I think I don't always clock my suspicion of the easy things in the moment. But if I think about it, when I am taking notes on other things and adding to my digital garden, there is sort of this worry that I'm procrastinating something that's quote unquote more important. And when I think about why do I feel like it's not the most important thing? Is it because it feels easy and fun? So I feel like I almost need to rush through the process of doing the easy and fun part because it feels almost like the quote unquote real part of the process is the part that's harder. I even think back to being in my acting studio, the things that were feeling like they were coming really naturally to me and were quote unquote easy to me. I did have this almost guilt when I was doing those things because I was like, well, I should be spending more time trying to get better at the things that I am not as good at instead of indulging in these parts that are really easy to me. So I like this reminder of don't feel like you need to push past it just because it feels easy right now. It's actually okay to let some parts of this be easy. So yeah, those are generally the three things that I find happen in the middle of the process. It either starts to feel really hard, really boring, or way too easy. All three things can get you in your head and stick you right in your fears of not creating something valuable and then lead you to quit before you've finished. If you can push through those feelings and fears, then you can arrive at a finish line. But Celine Nguyen's Oblique Strategies for Starting actually makes a really interesting point. She says, finishing is a skill that's distinct from the more specific, obvious skills of writing, designing, drawing, painting, building, producing. Every essay I finish makes me incrementally better as a writer. At the bottom of every draft I write is an area for my outtakes, the paragraphs that are beautifully written but useless to my thesis, the points I wanted to make but couldn't land, the details that are unnecessary, even though I'm attached to them, all the words I had to leave behind to finish a work and make it feel whole. And this passage reminded me of something that my professors used to say in college all the time, and it kind of never made sense to me. It made sense, but I kind of was like, why are we wording it like that? Where the professors, in the context of theater and film, when you're devising a new piece, they would say, kill your babies. which basically meant that sometimes you are going to have to get rid of your favorite pieces of a project in order to reach the finish line, the things that you feel very attached to, because they don't actually serve the overall purpose of the thing that you're trying to make at the end of the day. I guess you could call it trimming the fat, so to speak. And I've kind of never heard this idea more beautifully put than an essay by Victoria on Substack called "An Act of Creation is Always an Act of Betrayal." She says there is always something lost in the process, and that's okay. Creation means doing violence upon the idea. It means warping and distorting it for foreign, unintended eyes. An act of creation is always an act of betrayal. To create something is to kill the idea of it, and you have to get a taste for blood. And I love that. I think it's such a beautiful, dramatic way of just saying, like, it's not going to be what you have in your head, and that is okay. That's part of the beauty of it. You're going to surprise yourself along the way. You're going to let yourself down along the way. It's going to be okay. You're going to put something out there into the world that is not a picture-perfect rendition of what you thought it would be. When I'm in the process of making these episodes, there are so many moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to connect this and this and this and this and this, and I have so many different ideas. And then by the end of it, I'm like, oh, there's this one thing that I wanted to talk about, but it just isn't fitting. It's just not making sense here. It's not the time for this piece yet. And I don't know that I would call that killing my babies. I still think that that is sort of a ridiculous way of saying it, but that's what it is. You kind of have to be okay with the fact that you are going to have to sort of betray that vision in your head a little bit and let it be what it is. Give yourself some sort of cutoff point for whatever it is that you're making. And yeah, I think that's all I've got for you today. I think I might have an episode coming next week. It'll be a shorter episode, but it'll be a little bonus. I've been getting a lot of people asking for a follow-up to the digital gardening episode. Just more information. It seems that the words digital garden are taking on a life of their own as they fly through the internet, which is fine, but I do want to revisit it. So it might be a little shorter bonus episode. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope this was helpful for you. I will talk to you next week.